This program is brought to you by thepodcastfactory.com.
How would you like to get more customers, make more profits, and have bigger breakthroughs? Get Doberman Dan's Profit Boosting Breakthroughs. Normally, this would cost you $98 per month, but right now, for listening to this show, he's giving you a free copy of his Doberman Dan letter. All you have to do is go to DobermanDan.com and sign up to get your free copy now.
Prepare yourself for the uncensored, nothing held back, no BS reality of how business and life really work. Doberman Dan is off the chain.
You are listening to Doberman Dan's Off the Chain show. Welcome back, Canine Crew. Today we have part 2 of the interview with Sean McCool, and it's about to get very heady. So prepare yourself as we dive back in.
So somebody took something from the metaphysical and created it in the physical because it was nothing. It was an idea in somebody's mind that I think a bencher would be a good idea.
Yeah. And now, obviously, if you want to get technical and, analogies tend to fall apart at some point or whatever, but, they're obviously ore and metal ore and things like that. And petroleum for the paint and all that stuff is in the earth and existed. But, the 99.9% of it was thought and language. I tell my clients that you can have anything you want in life if you're willing to have one of 3 conversations. You can have anything you want in life if you're willing to have one of 3 conversations. A conversation with yourself, one of the most dominant ones, a conversation with another person, or a conversation with God. Now, if you don't believe in God, then you're down to 2, and it's even easier, I guess. But if you think about it, nothing happens aside from either having a conversation with yourself or having a conversation with another person. Like, you can't create anything in this world. You can't create income. You can't create a better, family relationship. You can't do anything without those conversations happening. And if you realize that and you really get that, like if you really let that sink in, then you begin to realize that the only thing holding you back is not circumstances. It's not political climate. It's not anything other than having the right series of conversations.
Now, the conversation with yourself would explain why most of my life, my income sucked. Well, frankly, my life sucked too, because I guess I was not having the right conversations with myself. I mean, obviously, when the voice in your head tells you you're a piece of shit, and you don't deserve anything, that's not the right conversation.
Right. Yeah. And we inherit that, and we learn that from somewhere in a previous conversation, that our parents had with us, that a teacher had with us, a coach had with us, somebody had with us. And that's why perspective, an outside perspective, like a coach or somebody, or books, or a line in a movie, a line in a song, can be that seed of a conversation that starts you thinking in a different direction. So if I were to ask you, like, when or how did that conversation start changing that allowed you to build a supplement business when you had no business doing that, no real reason or proof that you could do it, you just did it. What shifted that conversation for you? What conversation changed for you?
That's a good question, because I'd actually hadn't looked at it from that point of view. Well, I guess I had enough good conversations with myself to get my ass off the couch and do something. And it was, it was probably something along the lines of, yeah, I've been told I'm Barberton, Ohio white trash all my life, but I know some other people have been told that too, and they build a business. So, maybe there's a chance. Maybe I can do this.
Yeah. And that's a series of like observations. So when you were watching somebody or something somewhere, you picked up some things along the way that, first of all, you noticed, that somebody had succeeded. You noticed that, and you took that into account, and you didn't just dismiss it. You held on to that. And, that little story, which is, a self-directed conversation, is one way to look at that. You just that story kept kind of talking to you in the back of your mind somewhere. And that created possibility, so it goes back to what I said earlier. Perspective plus possibility equals performance. you're not going to take performance if you don't have a different perspective and that perspective leads to a possibility. So you saw a different perspective. You saw someone whose life was different than yours from the same area that you were from. You say, wait a second, something's different. So your perspective about what's possible shifted in that moment, even if it was slightly. 1 degree over 10 miles is a big difference. Like when I was in the military, we did land navigation courses before, GPS, and we just had to actually use a map and a compass. If you were off 1 degree over the course of 10 clicks or, 10 kilometers, you weren't going to be anywhere near where you were supposed to be.
Even that tiny little error in that navigation would do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also what a tiny little shift in perspective, positive or negative, can do in your life. There's been this kind of infection of, there's high ticket coaching in the world right now. And hey, I charge high ticket for my one-on-one, but it went just, I think over the last couple of years, it kind of went to an extreme where people were like, you got to have the intense, immersive experience, or, you got to have the one-on-one. But the fact is, a small shift that you get, and it literally can be a line from a movie. The one that pops into my head is we bought a zoo, and Matt Damon's talking to his son. He's like, all you really need is 6 seconds of insane courage. When he was talking about how he met his wife. That's a great line, and that line can literally change somebody's life if they hear it. Now, if they don't hear it and they just walk by it, there's not much there. But if they hear it and they're like, and they start thinking about it, I wonder if that's true. Is that true? Could that be true? And they start to think about it and get some perspective, and it opens up this area of possibility in their life. Now that perspective plus that possibility allows for action that was not available to you before. And it was just through some language that somebody spoke.
Well, that perspective change and that conversation with yourself can be the impetus for action. Would you say that taking action while still having the self-defeating negative conversations with yourself, can you still get results that way? Or does the perspective change, does it always precede action?
I think it precedes the first action. And then the action itself offers a perspective, right? So one of my coaches told me one time, he's like, imagine you're in a hotel room, you're in a house and it's on the beach, but you're in the front room of the condo that's on the beach, right? And somebody else is in the living room or out on the balcony, and they're looking at the beach and they're yelling back to you, man, you got to see the beach. The ocean is gorgeous. You got to see this. And you're like, but you're up in the front room and you're like, well, I don't see anything. Can't see anything. And they're like, well, just come over here and you can see it. And, so you take one step towards the door of the room you're in, and still, not much, but you get this faint little sound of ocean. So now your perspective has changed just a little bit. And that little bit of change, that slight change, can give you a new possibility of, well, I didn't hear the ocean before. And now I hear something that's kind of like what he described the ocean would sound like. So maybe there is something to this. And I think that gives you enough possibility to take the next step, and then the next and the next. And next thing you see light, and it's getting bright in the room, and maybe you smell some soft air. And next thing you know, you're standing on the balcony and you see what they see. And now you've got a whole new perspective that creates possibility. So I think they go hand in hand, and it's kind of a circle of life kind of thing, that you need the little bit of perspective to open up new possibility. Because the fact is, most people, I would say, in my experience, all people will not take action if there's not at least a glimmer of possibility. Why would you? There's got to be something there that says that it's possible. Otherwise, just as human nature, if it's completely not possible, we're probably not going to do it. But if I believe, even if it's faint, that it's possible, that belief opens up the possibility for action.
And then each action brings a new perspective that can spur other actions?
Yes. Yeah, because once you get action, you're in a different place than you were before. So you have a new perspective. Like, you've learned something. You have a new, maybe let's do something as simple as I read a book about copywriting, or heck, I read a sales letter about copywriting like I did. Before I got that letter, I had no idea that the world of copywriting as a career even existed. It wasn't even a possibility for me because I didn't know it. I talk about one of the things I talk about with clients is the paradox of possibility. And the paradox of possibility says the area of most possibility for your life is the one you are least likely to access.
What do you mean by that?
So there's three realms in the possibility. There is what you know. Now think of what you know as if we were to go to a university library, like a big, or the Library of Congress. But if you think about the biggest library you've ever been in, what you know might be one book on one shelf in one library. I mean, that's what you cognitively know and have experienced in your life. It could, it's in one book. That's realm number one, what you know. Realm number two is what you know you don't know. And you've heard these before, but what you know you don't know is the second realm of possibility. Now, you know that you don't know how to maybe change the oil in your car, for instance, but you know that. So you could go on Google or YouTube and you could do a search for how to change the oil in your car. But you have to know that that's a possibility that you can change your own oil before you would even know to search for it. And this is where a lot of people get, they're always looking for the how-to. They kind of know what they want, so they go look for how-to around what they want. But then there's this third realm of possibility. And the first two realms will get you some incremental linear results. The third realm of possibility is what you don't know, you don't know. You've heard that before, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it's this third realm of I don't know what I don't know. If the first realm was one book, the second realm would be the library itself. So you have access to all this information, but you kind of have to know what to go look for in if you were using, like I said earlier, I graduated in 89, so we still use card catalogs back then. But even on the computer, if you're going to search the Dewey Decimal System, you kind of have to know what you're looking for in order to find it. You got to know what to ask and what to search for. And that third realm, where the most possibility for your life lies, is what you don't know, you don't know. And that's where outside perspective and outside coaching, doing things that are outside your normal routine, taking a different way to work, going and see movies that you would not normally want to go see. All these things open up possibility for new perspectives that you'd not thought about before. So what I try to do with my clients is I try to ask questions, and I look for opportunities to find out what they don't know, and then introduce that to them, so that, because that's the quickest way to expand possibility, is to go where they don't know.
This is interesting because we just had a conversation with Dr. Charles Livingston, a really smart entrepreneur. And we were talking about the plateau that so many entrepreneurs hit. And one of the most common ones is they get to about 10 million, and then it's just like hitting the wall, man. Like you no matter how much you beat your head against a brick wall, there's that plateau. And they either stay there, get stuck there, or actually usually what happens, they start going backwards, because nothing is ever staying the same. It's either growing or dying.
Right.
So that happens, or through some sort of perception change or breakthrough, they get what they need that they didn't know they needed to take them past that point.
Yeah. And did he say what the number one cause he thought was that, hitting that $10 million plateau?
In his situation, which is, again, extremely common for people at that level, it's, you're an entrepreneur. You built this business. You created it on your kitchen table, with a yellow notepad and a blue pen. And this is your baby. You've grown it. You're an entrepreneur. You're good at creation. You're good at making this thing come alive. You ain't good at running the business.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I would have guessed. It shifts from sales and marketing to operations and running the numbers and all those kind of things. Vern Harnish, in his book, The Rockefeller Habits, if you were to pick up that book as an entrepreneur, you would see you'd have a new perspective on business, that it's about numbers, and it's about measuring certain things that maybe you'd not measured other than sales. That's a really great book for people who want to go to the next level. But yeah, possibility, perspective, it's where you're least likely to go look for it, because you don't know to go look. You don't even know it exists. How could you go look for it? And that's why it's so important to go. That's why, even though information and consuming information can get a bad rap sometimes, I think what's required, and what I suggest clients do, is you've got to get out of the normal information that you would normally go after. And we're losing serendipity in our world, because everything is tailored to us. I think of the Minority Report and, how accurate that movie was, where, personalized ads are showing up everywhere you go. And it's just like, we're not getting exposure to those third realms of possibility. What we don't know as often as we might have used to. I mean, you can go on Google and get exactly what you want in, 1.2 seconds or whatever. And we don't get that overlap. Even if you walk through the library and you're looking, you're scrolling, you walk, you find out what you're looking for. And as you search up and down the aisles, you find, because you got to slow down when you get close to your number, right? Your Dewey Decimal System number. So you start seeing the two tangents on either side of what the topic is you're looking for. And sometimes there's some cool stuff there. Or maybe you walk down the wrong aisle and all of a sudden some title catches your attention. And there's opportunities like that all in our life. Like I said earlier, go to a movie that you would never go to. Like, find out on Rotten Tomatoes what has the worst rating that weekend and go see that movie. Not because it's going to be good, but because it might offer a different perspective of something that you're not, and you don't know what it's going to be. I mean, that's the fun part of it. It's like, what can I notice here? And if you're aware and if you're open and you're noticing, then who knows what you might see? You might hear a song that leads to this, that leads to that leads to who knows what. And that one little shift, because you're open and you're intentional about looking for new things that you don't know, then it just opens a world of possibility to you.
You never know where the next inspiration or breakthrough is going to come from.
Yeah, you just don't know how it's going to apply to your relationships, to your fitness, to your business. It could apply in a lot of different areas, not just business.
I want to bring this down to, I have a specific example I'm going to use. I want to bring this down to the real pragmatic level of a problem that I keep hearing from many of the knights in my marketing Camelot. But first, before I do that, I want to go back to the three conversations. Conversation with yourself, conversation with others, conversation with God. So is that in any specific order? Like, say somebody decides, like, you know what, my life sucks and I'm to the point where I do want to change it. So do those conversations happen simultaneously? Do they go in a certain order, or what's the deal with that?
That's a good question. Honestly, I've never really thought of that way. I think the conversation with yourself is always going on. So that's going to be simultaneous with the other two conversations. I do think there's a focus depending on what it is you're going after. If I want a new client as a copywriter, maybe I'm a freelance copywriter and I want a new client, then there's two conversations I'm going to have for sure. One is with myself to have the guts to pick up the phone and call somebody, or to send an email, or to do the research or whatever. And probably inside that conversation is I'm good enough to go ahead and write for somebody that will pay me. There's a lot of little conversations that have to go on. But then, more practically, the outward conversations, you're going to have to talk to somebody that can write a check. And, knowing how to have that conversation, knowing how to structure that conversation, which is something I do with my clients, knowing how to sell yourself, not just write copy, but knowing how to sell yourself to a client is important. And learning how to frame that conversation up, how to have power and certainty in that conversation, so that you can get what you want. So I think they are going on kind of the same time, but then in being intentional about each conversation is how you get what you want from those conversations. And you can create other people pretty much however you want to. Like, if you're certain about what you're up to and you're certain in your conversation and what you're after and what you want to create, you are like the rock in the river and they're like the water that has to roll around the rock.
I've seen that a lot.
Yeah, and you can get people, whoever's the most certain. Go back to your example of Trump. Whoever's most certain will win that conversation. Not from it's not like we're trying to create losers. I mean, the other person gets what they need too. They need a copywriter. It goes back to Stephen Covey and a true win-win. But when you're certain about what you're up to, you're much more likely to get. Well, if you're certain, you're going to get what you want. Like, if you're certain, you'll get the type of client you want, you'll get the fees you want, and all those things.
Because in that certainty, you're not going to quit when you get your first no or your first 100 no's.
Right. Exactly.
So let's do a rubber meets the road thing here. What I hear a lot from knights in my marketing Camelot is, so I provide a ton of instruction on direct response marketing, copywriting, and how I personally prefer to start businesses. I like direct response driven businesses, the good old bootstrap entrepreneur, man. Start this thing on your kitchen table with a yellow notepad and a blue pen. And yes, the pen must be blue. And, and create something with a very limited budget. So there is more than enough instruction included in my membership to do that. Or for someone, someone can take the same instruction and use it to build an existing business. But a lot of people join me because they want a business like I have. But the constant thing I hear is they can't get started. And there are a plethora, of reasons and excuses I hear for that. But how do you take somebody from that stuck phase to getting them off their ass and doing these things?
Yeah, that's tough, and it's tough to do in a one-to-many. I think it's tougher in one-to-many than it is in a one-on-one situation. So when I'm one-on-one with a client, usually what happens is I will come up with an analogy or a metaphor, based on our conversations, based on my view of the world, that helps them see things a little bit differently. Which again goes, and I know it sounds like I'm talking in circles, but this is how, to me, this is how things happen. It's perspective, possibility, then performance, and then you repeat the cycle. I've also written an article called The 4 C's. It talks about commitment, consistency, clarity, and there's this loop that you go through. Dan Sullivan wrote something very similar. He talks about 4 C's. We wrote it at different times, and they're very, very similar. So to get people to take action, there's something that they're not believing is possible for them.
So focusing on the performance, just get off your ass and do it. It just ain't going to happen unless you get the perspective right.
Right. Because there's a reason they're not taking action.
So we need to start with the first P, right?
Right. So we need to figure out, how are they seeing the world that prevents them from keeping action? Like, what lie are they believing? What truth do they have set up? I'll give you a good example. I was talking with a client who is he was a copywriter. I think he still is. And he was actually working for one of the Agora divisions. And he and I were having a coaching conversation. He was stuck at about 80 grand a year, and he was trying to break through, and he just, he wasn't having the consistency, and he just couldn't get his income above about 80,000 a year. And he was working with an Agora affiliate. I mean, as a copywriter on staff, he should have been making twice that pretty easily. So we got to talking, and I knew something was stopping him from hitting that number. Like, he was doing the work, he was writing copy, he was getting promotions out the door, but something was still blocking him from getting to the next level. So we got to talking, and I said, what does your dad do? Or what did your dad do? Is he still alive? And he said, yeah, he's still alive. And I said, what kind of work did he do when you were growing up? And he said he was in construction. It's like, okay. Now, my dad was in construction, and we hired subcontractors. So I kind of had a little bit of understanding of that world. And I know that most construction workers that work with their hands and things like that don't necessarily like people that sit in offices. It's kind of like the same thing in the military with sergeants and enlisted and officers. So I knew that was in my brain. So I was like, that's interesting. So tell me about your dad and what he thought about his bosses and like the architects or people that, design the houses that maybe he was building. He's like, he said those guys, he always talked about how pencil pushers, they don't have any idea what's going on. I was like, okay, that's interesting. Pencil pushers. Is that the phrase he actually used? Yeah. I was like, what do you do for a living?
Oh my gosh.
And he was like, oh. So what I had him do is I had him call his dad as soon as we got off the phone and ask permission from his dad to be successful as a copywriter, not in life general, but specifically as a copywriter. And we talked about the two possibilities. His dad could tell him, I think it's stupid, you should be working for a living, or his dad would probably more likely say, hey, I'm fine with that. What makes you think that I wouldn't be fine with that? I'm glad you're doing that in an air conditioner and not sweating out like I did for 30 years. Because chances are his dad doesn't even know he's having that conversation about, quote, pencil pushers. So he had the conversation with his dad. And from that point forward, his income went above the 100,000 mark pretty quickly because his perspective changed. And whatever self-sabotaging behaviors he was doing to keep his income low, they kind of drifted away because he now had permission from his dad. He had a new truth, a new perspective, a new possibility for his life. And there's all kinds of things like that. So I know that's not an easy answer for the Knights, but the fact is there's something that they believe that's keeping them from taking action as a copywriter, as a business owner, an entrepreneur, or something. For me, and I know we're running short on time, but I'll just say this real quick. In 2005, I went to AWAI's boot camp the first time. 2008 was when I got hired by Stansberry. Those 3 years in between, I didn't do anything with copywriting. I know that's a shock, but I bought the course and put it on the shelf like everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. That's what most people do.
But in 2005, there was one line, and it was Clayton Makepeace who said it. He was the keynote speaker that year. And he said, if I were to, and there's 300 people in the room, if I were to wave a magic wand and make every one of you an A-level copywriter in this room, there would still be so much work available that, even if all of you were A-level copywriters, you couldn't fulfill all the work that would be needed. Because the fact that you were all A-level copywriters would actually create more work. And I didn't understand that at the time, but I believed it just enough that I didn't ditch the idea of copywriting to move on to something else. I kind of kept it kept hope alive. And it gave me a possibility that maybe this thing was real and maybe I could really do this as a career. And then what happened is as I got to 2008, there's some things that changed in my life and I got disgusted enough that I finally jumped in and said, I'm doing this come hell or high water. And from the time I said that in September of 2008 to January of 2009, just that short time span, I went from handyman to full-time copywriter with Stansberry.
Yeah, with one of the biggest, most successful direct marketing companies in the world.
And part of that was just because I'd seen a possibility 3 years earlier that I held on to, and it kind of marinated. So it's about expanding the possibility for the Knights. It's about finding out what thing is holding them up. Could be a conversation that they had as a parent. Could be it's a worldview of some kind that is keeping them from taking action.
I have two takeaways from that wrap up that you did from the last two examples you just used. So the most immediate one about your story going to the AWAI conference. So anybody who has been around this entrepreneur stuff, this direct marketing stuff, if that's your thing, who has been taking it in for a period of time or for years or decades, don't beat yourself up about it mentally. You've not yet had the perception shift necessary to cause the actions you need to get things going. And so that's that's my little way of giving hope to anybody who's in that situation. And the other takeaway from the story you told about the copywriter you were coaching is you can't see the picture if you're in the frame. That pencil pusher thing, he wasn't even consciously aware of how that limiting belief for that past programming was holding him back. It took somebody outside the frame, you, to give him the whole picture.
Exactly. It's the what you don't know, you don't know. That third realm of possibility. That's where, all the quantum leaps happen in that third realm of possibility, which is what you don't know, you don't know. And that requires that you get some outside perspective. It just does. And that's why some of the most successful people in the world, athletes, that's why so many people have coaches that are at high levels. I mean, athletes are the most common, but, we're seeing it more and more with CEOs and, even world leaders. They have, quote, coaches in their corner, advisors, whatever you want to call them, because they need the outside perspective.
Absolutely. Well, man, this has been great. This has been eye-opening. I appreciate you sharing all this stuff, Sean. If somebody wants to get more information about you, where should they go?
Just SeanMcCool.com, SEAN, like Sean Connery, and then McCool, MCCOOL.com. If you just do a search, Sean McCool, you'll find me either on AWAI. I've got a lot of stuff there that shows up, or my website. And then there's some guy that plays bass that's also named Sean McCool, but that is not me. So,
so you're not moonlighting in a band as a bass player?
No, that's not me. So, but SeanMcCool.com, I did grab the domain name a few years back, so that's the easiest place to find me.
Much to the chagrin of the bass player, I'm sure.
I'm sure, yeah.
Well, hey, man, thanks a bunch for your time today. I really appreciate it. Jonathan, you got anything that I missed?
Good stuff. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Canine Crew, for tuning in. And thank you for keeping it interesting with the physical and metaphysical today, Dan. That was a cool twist. We'll be back in your earbuds next time. Hope you enjoyed today's show. Canine Crew got a special treat for you, what we are affectionately referring to as the Off the Chain Hotline. Tell us you love us. Tell us you hate us. Ask questions. We don't care. Just call 321-424-6043 and give us a piece of your mind. Thanks for listening. And remember, if you want to create rivers of revenue from your existing customers, then the next thing you need to do is go to DobermanDan.com. He's giving away a free copy of his $98 per month Doberman Dan letter just for listening to the show.